Hello again, baseball fans, and welcome back to another episode of the MLB Draft Weekend Review. I am your host, Kris Dunn, joined as always by my good buddy. What is going on here?
I think you've got it open in another tab.
Wow, that was bizarre.
That was weird.
Yeah. So anyway, welcome to the MLB Draft Weekend Review. Joe, welcome in. How you doing, bud?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm excited to be back. Half hour later than usual, but man, it's still fun. It's still fun.
Yeah, anytime we can get him in, guys, thank you for bearing with us. Obviously, had to delay the show a half an hour tonight, but we will certainly get to all of your questions throughout the show. Anything that you want to ask about, we will be predominantly talking about the top 400. For those of you that did not catch it earlier today, the updated top 400 was dropped at prospectslive.com. So be sure to go over and check out that new updated list. We'll go over a lot of those guys we'll go over tonight here on the show, and any guys that you want to talk about, be sure to get those questions in and we'll get to them later on in the show. Joe, one thing before we get into any of those guys, one thing I want to throw out there, we saw something very bizarre this weekend. And I feel like we didn't get a chance to talk about this last weekend with the college pitcher that gave up the home run and then tackled the guy rounding third base.
Yeah.
That was probably the craziest thing that I've ever seen on a baseball field. But this past weekend, we saw something that was also quite interesting, and it's drawing a lot more attention simply because of the teams that were involved, and one team in particular being the number one team in the country. So I just want to take the moment, show you this clip. For those of you that have not seen it, this is a clip from the Tennessee-Auburn game this past weekend. And if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see the home run given up and then the bat flip. And the bat flip is what's drawing a lot of ire. And watch what the Tennessee coach does here. Take a look at the video.
But this happened. Watch the bat flip from Pierce, where it ends up in your lower right-hand corner. Tony Vitello comes out of the dugout. And watch what he does with the bat. He just airmails it over there right in the middle of the Tiger team. And that's when things got a little crazy. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. So that's when things got a little crazy. Obviously, tempers are heated. It is a conference matchup. We're getting to that time of year, Joe, but have you ever seen anything like this? Like, bat flips are here and they're not going anywhere, but man, that was bizarre.
I mean, that was that was a dirty bat flip.
Like, which one? The home run or the coach throwing
both.
It back?
I mean, both. That bat flip ended up in Tony Vitello's lap. I mean, it was 3 or 4 feet from the Tennessee dugout. Listen, I love Tony Vitello for college baseball. I think the bully tactic, I think the macho, we are Tennessee, don't mess with Tennessee status that they've really brought to their team. It really works. I think he's kind of turning them into the heel of the SEC, which I really dig.
It's not college baseball in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a wrestling heel type thing. So I had no problem with what Tony Vitello did. I think if it would have hit someone, it would have been a much bigger story. But yeah, I mean, he's sticking up for his team. He's sticking up for Tennessee. And kudos to the kid that threw it at the Tennessee dugout. I mean, that was quite a chuck.
So here's the thing. I also feel like if we're going to talk about it at great length like this, right? Like, and we're going to give it this much pub, let's also recognize that it's not like the bat flip went into the dugout. The bat flip went about halfway and the bat just happened to land in the correct position so that it kind of tumbled.
It tomahawked over.
Yeah, it like just kept going end over end and got its way there. So, it's not like he threw the bat into the Tennessee dugout, but certainly something that you don't see every day. And when it's the number one team in the country, and look, this isn't the first time that we've seen the number one team in the country, with some sort of, I don't want to say scandal, but
it's maybe the third
Texas,
or fourth time.
Well, and when Texas earlier on this year, they kicked a player off the team because he was going into the stands, drinking with, fans in the stands.
Well, let's not forget about the bats. I mean, Tennessee's bats have been questioned for being legal.
not legal.
I mean, Tennessee has offered to play with wooden bats because
And they didn't do that well in that game.
No, I mean, so listen, I like it. I think it makes for good storylines as long as nobody's actually cheating, as long as nobody's getting hurt. I'm all for the charade. I think it's what makes college sports so great. These guys aren't making. I should say traditionally, these guys aren't making any money. They're doing it for the love of the game, and emotions pour over. So I dig it, man. I think it's great for the sport.
Yeah, I think what's going to be interesting is when they get to the next level, right? When we're talking about the draft, we're talking about a lot of these guys getting to the next level. What does that look like at the next level? Because it's very hard to turn off the passion, right? If you have that passion and you have that, that level of excitement and emotion when you're on the field, that's not going to change from, one day when you're playing in college ball to, 6 months later when you're a professional playing in the minor leagues. That doesn't just go away. And a lot of times at the big league level, guys don't like that kind of stuff, right? So
what I love about Tennessee though? Tennessee is literally a roster of superheroes, right? I mean, every single character has a different superhero. I mean, Ben Joyce is out here throwing 105.5 3 times. What?
So what superhero is he? The Flash?
I mean, guys that burst into flame. I don't know. I mean, Blade Tidwell is this guy that has recouped his health and is now just shoving. Drew Gilbert is like the spark plug at the top that nobody can stop. You got Hulk Hogan, Jordan Beck over here, who's just a monster hitting mammoth tanks. And then you got all of these supplementary role players that would be batting cleanup everywhere else. Trey Lipscomb, Christian Moore. The team is just so complete. It's such a complete team. I don't know how anyone could favor anyone else but Tennessee and Omaha.
I'm just super impressed and excited that you have now, within the first 7 minutes of the show, you have made 2 different wrestling references.
Yeah.
And in doing so, you mentioned that Hulk Hogan may or may not be a superhero.
I don't know where I went with any of that, man.
I love it.
It's like WCW, NWO all over again. And these guys are NWO.
Yeah, right. No one likes them. They are definitely the heel of college baseball. All right, Joe. So let's get into it. The top 400 was updated this morning. For those of you that didn't get a chance, we're going to run through the top 50 and kind of go over some of those guys, some guys that we haven't had a chance to go over quite a bit, some guys that you guys might not even be too familiar with at all. And we're going to go over that. So we're going to start right at the top and work our way back from 1 through 50. And so right at the top of the list here, Joe, we see Drew Jones, number 1 overall. Still nothing changed there from the last update. But one thing that did change a bit here is Kevin Parratta. We've talked about Kevin Parratta a lot this year. I told you, I think in week 1 or week 2 of this show, that he was probably my favorite college bat. I did not anticipate the stock getting this high for him, but he has just steadily improved his draft stock throughout the season. Brooks Lee, the shortstop at Cal Poly at 3, Elijah Green, the high school outfielder, in at number 4. And then Jackson Holliday, obviously the son of former Colorado Rocky, former St. Louis Cardinal, New York Yankee, Matt Holliday. This is a name, Joe, where this is the first time he's been inside the top 5. And this is a name that maybe not a lot of people know too much about. Certainly if you watch the show, if you're a regular to Prospects Live, if you're a subscriber to the Patreon, then you probably know a little bit about him. But this is probably, of the 5 on this page here, this is the one that people are less familiar with. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, Jackson Holliday has gone from a guy that, at the beginning of the season we had in that 30 to 40 range, mostly because it was a streaky summer last year. But all he's done is hit, and the body looks great, and he's got a really good chance to stick at shortstop. The hit tool has come back much greater than it was last year. And then you stack the lineage on top of it, and for us, there's just so much to like about Jackson Holliday that we felt he was deserving of this spot.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, lineage, right? Because we're kind of we're in that era, I guess, where you and I can remember watching the parents And we can remember, maybe not scouting them in their younger years, but certainly watching them and following them throughout their careers, maybe even some of them getting a chance to see them when they were in the minors. And so it's very interesting because there are a lot of guys, and there's another name that we'll get into inside this top 50 that we'll spotlight a little bit later on in the show. And we'll go over, again, has that lineage. You look at a team like the Toronto Blue Jays, right? They are just littered with lineage. I mean, they are basically a bloodline of all-stars at the major league level. And so it's interesting to see yet another one coming up here in Jackson Holiday. So he comes in at number 5. Next up, 6 through 10 here, Joe. We've got Tamar Johnson, Jace Young, Daniel Susac, Gavin Cross, the outfielder at Va-Tech, and then Dylan Lesko, recently undergoing Tommy John surgery. So we won't get a chance to see him pitch for quite a while. The right-handed pitcher from the high school ranks in Georgia. Jace Young is an interesting name here for me because when I look at him, I say, okay, here's a guy, not necessarily bloodline in the sense, but obviously his older brother is knocking on the doorstep of the big league level.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm of the belief that a lot of times the younger brother is better than the older brother when we're talking about these prospects. I know you don't like to hear that. So the thing that has caught my eye here is that we often talk about, and when we're talking about the top 400, guys that are on the rise, or maybe some guys that are falling down the ranks a little bit. But when you look at Young, Joe, I don't think that he's been any higher than 6 or 7, which right now he's at 7. And I don't know that he's been any lower than like 11, 12. Like, can you recall him ever being outside the top 10?
No, I think Jace Young has been between like 4 and 10 all year. I mean, he hasn't moved. He has been a steady Eddie. We were talking about it before the beginning of the show. I mean, listen, he had a slow, if you even want to call it, start at that massive tournament at Minute Maid Park. But you're talking about a guy that has a 23% walk rate. You're talking about a guy that has an 11% strikeout rate. I mean, he's got 11 homers. He's got, he's hitting like 380 this year in the Big 12. I just don't know what else Jace Young can do to improve his stock. He's been one of the top 3 hitters in college baseball, and it's not even something that can really be argued, I think, at this point. He's just a safe but good pick. The guy has looked pretty good at second base too, and I think he can handle third base. I just think Jace Young, if there was one guy in this top 10 that I was super confident about going in the top 10, Jace Young would be on the short list of top 2 or 3 players. He's just, there's so much safety, and he fits the model.
Both Susac and Cross are up a little bit from where they'd been at the beginning of the season and a little bit over the last update. What are your thoughts on them? Obviously, Susac at the beginning of the year, we're talking about in comparisons with Kevin Parratta, but clearly Parratta has the upper hand there now. Cross, another one of those guys, he could be the first outfielder taken, but perhaps there are some other guys that might climb a little bit. We've got a couple outfielders that we'll get into on this list that many people think might be a little bit better, a little bit more advanced, I guess, maybe a pick than Cross there. But what about either one of those two guys for you?
Yeah, the thing that has really stood out about Gavin Cross, especially over the last few weeks, is his athleticism is really starting to come through. He has looked very, very good in the field. He's showing off the arm. He's showing off the speed. He's going to be at least an above average defender in right field, and the power is really starting to come through too. But I mean, with Susac, you're talking about a catcher that's hitting over 400 in the Pac-12. He's going to have double-digit home runs. He's going to be young for the class. He's slugging. He's walking. I mean, there's not a lot not to like about Daniel Susac. I mean, yeah, the strikeout rate is a little bit high, 15 or 16%. But for us, and when we made this list, I think we put a lot of weight on the ability to stay at catcher, because for me and for the draft team, I think I can speak for them. College catchers that project to have a big bat and stick at the position, generally hold more value than where they might be ranked on a lot of other lists.
Yeah, I think the thing that is most interesting to me on this list here with these guys is that Dylan Lesko, and the fact that we're not going to get a chance to see him pitch for a while. He was probably the first pitcher taken. There's a chance that maybe he still is the first pitcher taken. Do you believe that he will still be the first pitcher taken off the board?
I don't know. There are some college pitchers that are pushing right now that I think could push their way up into the top 15, but I ultimately think that's where he fits. I don't see Lesko making it past the top 15. I know that there have been, conversations of him slipping into the 20 to 30 range. I don't see it happening. I mean, listen, Dylan Lesko has been the best pitcher for his age group for 4 years. He has not had a hiccup at any point. His velo has never dropped. His stuff has never backed up. He's never been hit hard. He's arguably the best high school pitcher we've seen since Dylan Bundy. And I would imagine that there are teams in the 11 to 15 range that if he were to end up on their plate and available to them, they never thought that was going to happen. And I don't see a way where he stays on the board the second half of the first round.
So here's an interesting scenario, right? The Mets have 11 and 14. We've talked about them going pitcher possibly with both of those picks. But after what happened last year with Kumar Rocker.
Well, not only that, but I mean, you look at JT Ginn. JT Ginn hasn't been healthy well. He wasn't always healthy when he was with the Mets. And, Matt Allen, he blew out immediately upon arriving to New York. I don't think, I could be wrong. I mean, I could certainly be wrong, but they've dealt with so many draft injuries to pitchers that have derailed what they thought was going to be, simpler times. I don't think they're the team that's going to go for an injured pitcher, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly something to watch because they do have those 2 picks. So maybe they take a chance, right? All right, let's look at 11 through 15 here. We're going to get a couple, 3 actually very, very, very highly regarded high school arms here. Brandon Parratta in it at number 11, the left-hander. Jordan Beck, the outfielder from Tennessee. Chase DeLauder, who at the beginning of the season we had at number 1. So obviously he's come down a little bit. Andrew Dukanich. So that's a name that's certainly on the rise. Many people might not be aware of Dukanich, the high school pitcher from Indiana. And then left-handed pitcher Jackson Ferris, who's at IMG Academy down in Florida. What about Dukanich here? Because again, this is one of those guys that people might not be too familiar with. I think all the other names on this list you might know. We've certainly talked a lot about Jordan Beck, a lot about Chase DeLauder, and even a little bit about Jackson Ferris and Parratta, but not too much about Dukanich other than over the last couple of weeks. So what about him here?
Yeah, cold weather arm. He's up in that belt up in the Great Lakes regions. Listen, Dukanich impressed us last year, but his command was spotty and there was some effort in his delivery. He's shown up this spring. He looks like he's put on 10 pounds of muscle, 15 pounds of muscle. The kid is an absolute barrel now. I mean, he looks like a pro already. It's all good weight. Fastball has been, 93 to 97. He's holding 94 to 96 into the 5th inning. Breaking ball is over 3,000 RPMs. He's got this Max Scherzer bulldog mentality. And he's just been mowing hitters down. I mean, he had like 19 strikeouts, I think, last week in a game. So finding a good slot for him was tough. And I think when you compare him to a guy like Jackson Ferris was good. I mean, he had another solid spring. I think a lot of people were expecting him to, tick forward just a little bit, and he was good, not great. So we personally felt like Dukanich was, he had a little bit better runway. He had a little bit better trajectory than that of Ferris. And he was just throwing more strikes. So I think, you spoke of the New York Mets at 11 and 14. Dukanich is a guy that certainly seems to fit kind of the Mets mold. That's a guy that I might circle for those guys.
Anyone else on this list? What about Barrier? We haven't talked too much about him. So Beck quite a bit, DeLauder a bit, but Barrier is one of those high school arms from the left side.
Yeah, so the reason that we have Barriera where we do is because we just think he is so much more athletic than any other high school arm in this class. I think he's going to be easier to develop. He's going to be easier to mold. He's already got the makings of a plus slider. The fastball shape needs work. I will say that it got hit a little bit this year, but it's an above average changeup. It's a plus slider. It has the makings of an above average to plus fastball if he can kind of develop in consistent shape. But at the end of the day, I think what you're talking about with Barriera is kind of the Marcus Stroman starter kit. It's a guy that you can mold into what you want him to be, however you want him to become that, because he's a shortstop on the mound. It's really impressive. And I think Barriera, especially from the left side, just presents unique value.
All right, let's move on to 16 through 20. We've got Zach Neto, the shortstop at Campbell, Cam Collier, Blade Tidwell, Gabriel Hughes, who we've talked quite a bit about, the right-hander up in the Pacific Northwest at Gonzaga. And then Brock Porter rounds out the top 20, the prep right-hander from Michigan. Let's talk a little bit about Blade Tidwell here. Recently came back. We've had a chance to see him. Hasn't worked any more than, I believe, 4 1/3 in any of his appearances so far, slowly working his way back into, longer appearances, building up the arm strength, obviously working his way back from the injury. So where is he right now? And do you see, I guess, I know we recently had the mock, but in that range for Tidwell, is he also in play, possibly like we talk about the Mets there at 11 to 14?
I think so. I think the Mets would love to get, an older college pitcher that kind of fits what they're looking for. The shoulder injury, the shoulder fatigue, the impingement, certainly something that would make teams nervous. I think you definitely want to get a clean bill of health before you, dive into Blade Tidwell and offer him $4 million. But at the end of the day, he's ramping up. He's throwing a little bit more pitches every time he goes out there. But I think more importantly, he's 97 to 98 with a dynamite breaking ball, and he's got a pro body. He's got a clean delivery. He's got a track record in a class that doesn't have a lot of, I don't want to say sure thing college pitchers, but high upside college pitchers. I think Blade Tidwell represents one of the better values here.
And then what about Brock Porter a little bit? Again, we talked about the cold weather arm here, and I'm a big believer. I wasn't until about 2 or 3 years ago. I wasn't as much of a believer in the cold weather arms and really targeting them. As a matter of fact, I went the complete opposite, and I would go so far as to target the kids from Florida and Georgia and Texas and California that get to play year round, Arizona. And so recently we've seen a little bit of a shift, and it's simply because they don't have the wear and tear. And when you see all of the injuries that we've seen this season, it's hard not to go back to those cold weather states and those prep arms from the Northeast or from the Midwest that, look, their season starts when a lot of these kids in Florida and Georgia are ending almost, right? By the time they even get out to the field, a lot of the seasons are halfway through and almost done down in the South. So talk about Brock Porter a little bit here.
Yeah, I think Brock Porter has a chance to really move up this list as we move into the warmer spring months for the cold weather states. What we've seen so far has been really good. He's been up to 99 inside sessions. The changeup looks great. It looks like the slider has taken a step forward, both in terms of spin and shape. And I think if we get reports out of the Midwest that slider is consistently being thrown harder and with more spin, you've got to put him up in that same range as Dukanich and Ferris and even Barriera, because it's another great frame, 6'4", 205 pounds with a quick arm and projectability. Brock Porter could definitely fit up there. I just want to make sure that the breaking ball has really taken those next steps that we expect it to.
All right, so we're going to get outside the top 20 here and go 21 to 25. Dylan Beavers, the outfielder from California. Jacob Berry, obviously a lot of people concerned here and questioning why the slide. Noah Schultz, the left-hander from Illinois. Walter Ford, the right-handed prep arm from Florida. And then Cooper Jerpy, the left-hander from Oregon State. Before we get into Beavers here, Joe, I'm going to go out to a question that we have in the chat since it pertains to a guy on this list here. And Joshua Holgan wants to know, curious why you guys have Barry falling so much. The numbers are similar, if not better than last year, and the defense has been about as expected. The bat just seems too good to come in at 22. For my money, okay, fine. The defense has been about as expected, but the defense is just not good.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the defense at Arizona was Jacob Berry couldn't get any time at third base. And so I look at that and I go, okay, maybe you play him at first base. They didn't even play him at first base. They played him at DH quite a bit. So with Berry, I personally think he doesn't look like he can play the field right now. He doesn't look to me like he is athletic enough to handle third base. Certainly he could play first base, but even then, the hands and the athletic movements aren't just, you expect him to move a little bit better. Could he play a corner outfield position? Hey, if Kyle Schwarber can play a corner outfield, then so can Jacob Berry.
Yeah,
but here's the thing. Like, I look at Jacob Berry's numbers and yeah, they're good, but you look at the underlying metrics and you look at the exit velos and you look at some of that, and yeah, his approach is great, but I would say that Jacob Berry's swing is very much optimized for lifting the ball and power and just slugging the ball to right field. So when I look at that, I personally think he's more solid average to above average power and not, this hulking slugger that I think a lot of people make him out to be. Listen, at the end of the day, Jacob Berry will probably go before 22 because of his bat. It's a very good bat. It's a good hit tool. I just don't think it has quite the impact that some do. And I also think that the defensive woes, for me personally, are a bit of a red flag in terms of where to play him at the next level.
And let's also not forget, look, we're talking about a guy who we have right now as our number 22 overall draft prospect in the top 400. If you want to sit here and say that 22 is bad, well then, okay. But really, I mean, like you said,
listen, I get it. Like, a lot of people, and especially LSU fans, SEC baseball fans, they watch Jacob Berry just blister the ball at LSU every weekend, and you say, how can anyone think that this is not a top 10 or a top 15 draft pick? Listen, I am certainly not saying that Jacob Berry is not going to go in the top 10 or top 15. All we're saying at Prospects Live, and we have deductive reasonings for what we're doing. All we're saying is we personally, as a site, as a team, believe that there are 21 players that provide a little bit more value than does Berry.
And I think that's the key point right there. Like, that's where you kind of hit the nail on the head. There's just 21 guys that provide a little bit more value, and you'd be hard pressed to try to point out one of those guys and say that Jacob Berry is going to give you more all around value, right? At the end of the day, we're talking about value. That's what teams want. And you said it best. Like, there's just guys ahead of him that give you a little bit more of that value. So let's get into Dylan Beavers here, because obviously that's the guy that we want to highlight. We talk about outfielders, and Beavers, I don't think gets mentioned as, he doesn't get mentioned enough for being possibly the first outfielder selected in this draft class from the college ranks. And so I think that's interesting. We talked a little bit about the guys from Tennessee, talk about Gavin Cross, but Beavers has a legit chance to be the first college outfielder selected here.
Yeah, I think what Beavers provides is a really athletic right fielder. There are definitely concerns. I'll be the first to say that we are higher on Beavers than I think his slash line and his batted ball metrics would suggest. He makes a lot of contact. He has a good eye at the plate. The approach in 2021 was among the best in college baseball. But this year, he's hitting 298. He's slugging 665. He's walking 18% of the time. So, I mean, that is still exemplary. But the strikeout rate is up. It's at about 19%. I'd really like to see that come down before the end of the year, get closer to a 16% mark. And I'd feel a little bit more comfortable about where we have him here. But at the end of the day, I think you're talking about a left-handed hitting corner outfielder with a monster arm plus raw power and the ability to steal you some bases and play an above average right field. So I think there's still questions about the bat and his ability to make consistent contact. But when he does, it's really loud, and he provides tools all over the scouting report.
All right, so let's get outside the top 25 here, 26 through 30 on our updated top 400 over at Prospects Live. Again, you can go and check out that full list. It dropped this morning, so you can get the full updated top 400 prospects. In at number 26, Jet Williams, the high school shortstop from Texas. 27 is Drew Gilbert, one of those outfielders from Tennessee. Sterling Thompson at Florida. Ian Ritchie, the high school right-handed pitcher from the state of Washington. And Justin Crawford, the outfielder from the high school ranks in Nevada. I want to talk a little bit about Justin Crawford here, Joe, simply because this is where we're going to get bloodlines. This is where we're going to get heritage. This is the son of former big leaguer Carl Crawford. So clearly there's going to be a lot of teams with eyes on him. There's going to be a lot of teams that have probably seen him and followed him for many, many years because Carl Crawford played for several teams or just because he's been around the game for so long. Talk about Justin Crawford here, because I think this is another one of those guys that, you know, a lot of people might not be too familiar with in terms of, you know, the top 25, the top 20 discussions when we talk about the mock drafts and things like that.
Yeah, Justin Crawford could have been higher than this. We had internal discussions about, you know, moving him up 3 or 4 more spots, but the swing has looked a lot cleaner this spring. He's hitting for more power. He's hitting for more authority. He's still an 80 runner at the very, very top of the scale. And yeah, lineage plays into it. I mean, I would be lying if I didn't say we didn't look at Jackson Holliday and Justin Crawford and think, look at all the stars in the big leagues right now that have turned growing up around the game into substantial talent and production at the big league level. And there's just so many players that have taken that route that have seemed to make it work, that I think we're you know, it's early in the research stages, but I think there's a case to be made that lineage is a definitive pro when you're talking about, scouting a kid.
Yeah, I think the boom or bust rate on the lineage prospects is, you know, well above 50%, right? I mean, we're talking about, yeah, you have to, like you said, go through a lot of research and find out who some of those other guys are that didn't quite pan out in recent years. But when you talk about, you know, the guys on the Blue Jays, you talk about Vlad, you talk about Bo Bichette, you talk about Fernando Tatis with the Padres, like there's plenty of guys.
Biggio, there's a million of them.
And Biggio. And look, you could make a case that Biggio is like the least accomplished at this point of those bloodline guys. But I mean, still,
the list is short. Like the only guy that hasn't clicked for yet is Griffin Conine, and Griffin Conine is still having some mammoth games. You know, the book is not written on Griffin yet. But listen, at the end of the day, these guys all have been around the game since they were toddlers, but they've been around big league clubhouses since they were toddlers. The big lights, the bright lights, it doesn't scare these kids. And I think there needs to be something that needs to be said for that.
Anyone else on this list that you see, Joe? We've talked quite a bit about Drew Gilbert, Sterling Thompson. You know what? What about Ian Ritchie here? Obviously, you are familiar with the Pacific Northwest. Have you had a chance to get out and see Ian Ritchie play yourself, or what do you know about him?
Yeah, I've seen 3 Ritchie starts at this point. It's a kid that is polished over everything. He's probably got the best pitchability in this class. He's a kid that's going to fill up the strike zone. He's been up to 97. He generally settles in 92 to 93. It's a really good slider that he gets to and he can pitch backwards with. I think when it comes to high school pitchers, the ability to not only repeat, but keep it clean and throw strikes is a big deal. And for a kid that's throwing 97 with a potential plus slider, I think Ritchie presents value and safety in a demographic that generally doesn't possess it.
All right, so that's a quick look at the top 30. Basically, if you want to look at it, these are the names that you might see in the first round discussion. Certainly many of these names will go in the first round. Some of them might fall out a little bit, and we're going to have some guys that are a little bit lower on this list. And we might even have some guys outside the top 50 that end up going outside the top 75, right? We saw Frank Mazzucato last year, who was just barely inside our top 50. I believe he was on draft day. I believe we had him at number 49. And he went early. Mazzucato went 7. So obviously quite a big jump from where we had him at 49. So this is where you're going to start to see some names that could potentially creep up into that early first round discussion. Yep. Let's get into 31 to 35. Roman Anthony in here at 35. Joe, want to talk a little bit about him. I saw Ian Smith, one of our scouts. Ian Smith does great work for us. If you guys aren't following him on Twitter, be sure to do so. But Smitty does a lot of great stuff, and he actually comped Roman Anthony to like a budget, a garden variety, variety version of Zach Veen.
Yeah, and I would even argue that Roman Anthony might be a better runner at the same stage than Zach Veen. I mean, listen, Roman Anthony has kind of been on our peripherals for a full year. I mean, Smitty has been hyping this kid up. He's been floating around that top 150 range for a long, long time, and he has come out this spring so physical and so athletic, and he's producing. It was impossible to keep him down any longer. I think in our last update 5 weeks ago, we had Roman Anthony up into the top 80. But since then, 5 weeks, I think he has 9 home runs in the last 5 weeks, maybe in the last 4 weeks. So he gets a big bump. There's that we've spoken to some different teams that think he is a pretty good bet to go in the top 50 picks. So yeah, Roman Anthony, definitely one of the biggest risers and a definitive guy to keep in mind for day one.
All right, let's get to 36 through 40 here. The guy that I really want to talk about here, because I had a chance, guys, if you haven't been following along, be sure to go to the Prospects Live YouTube channel and check out all of the great draft prospect interviews. I'm going to give Joe a plug here. He does a fantastic job sitting down with a lot of these guys and just getting to know them a little bit. Not necessarily about baseball, not just about, their performance on the field and their strengths or their weaknesses in terms of their overall game, but really just getting a chance to spend some time and ask them questions about them as a person and their personality and what they like to do for fun and those sorts of things, what they like to do off the field. It's a really great watch. It's a really great listen. So go to the Prospects Live YouTube channel and check out some of those interviews that Joe does. There are tons of them. Pretty much anyone that we're going to talk about on this list, at some point, Joe's probably sat down and talked with them. So go ahead and check out some of those interviews. One of the ones that recently posted on the channel was Max Martin here, the shortstop from the Northeast, New Jersey, cold weather guy. The interview was fantastic, Joe. I had a chance to watch it, and I love this kid.
He's got a chip on his shoulder.
I think the excitement, even just watching the interview, just seeing the level of excitement and enjoyment and passion that he has for the game. I had a hard time watching him and not thinking, wow, this reminds listening to him and watching him on the interview kind of reminded me of like Francisco Lindor. Now he's always smiling and he just always has a smile on his face. So tell us a little bit about Max Martin here and I guess his skills and ability on the field.
Yeah, Max Martin really surprised me in the interview. One thing that I took away was Max doesn't care who's on the mound. Max, it could be Justin Verlander on the mound, but to Max, it's just another pitcher and it's just another guy throwing baseballs, and he's going to do his best to not only hit him but impact him. And he's having a good spring. He's impacting the baseball. This is a really, really, really physical kid, and he's an extremely hard worker. I'm really impressed by the time that he puts into the game and just his willingness to win over anything. He's a team first guy, but more than anything, I think Max Martin in this class by other publications is just really being undersold for how good of an athlete he is, the sort of bat speed that he presents, the body. I think Max Martin is a pretty good bet to go in the top 50 or 60 picks. And I think he's going to surprise some people in July.
I also think, look, he plays the premium position. And he
Right.
plays, and he's young enough. So a lot of teams like the prep shortstop, and he is one of them, and he's one of the best. So is it crazy to think that maybe of the prep shortstops, some team out there thinks that he might be the second best prep shortstop, or maybe the third best shortstop in the entire draft class? No, I don't think that's crazy. So we could see a team, maybe even in the first round, if he keeps performing, he could work his way into that first round conversation for sure.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Max Martin is a very, very good player, and it would not surprise me whatsoever if he went the first 30 picks.
All right, so take a look at number 41 through 45. Again, we're running through the top 50 here. You can check out the full top 400 over at prospectslive.com. 41, Cade Doughty, the third baseman from LSU. Catcher Logan Tanner at Mississippi State. Tucker Tolman is the one that I want to talk to you a little bit about here. Again, not many people know a ton about him. We have him most recently in our mock draft going in the first round to the St. Louis Cardinals. So talk a little bit about the prep third baseman here out of South Carolina.
Yeah, switch hitter, plays shortstop right now, but most expect him to move to third base. He doesn't have, he doesn't have the shortstop lateral burst that you'd want to see. But he's really grown. I mean, this is a big kid now. He's showing power to all fields. He is an 80 makeup kid. I mean, the guy really, really wows scouts in his interviews and his introductory Zooms. I think Tucker Tolman is probably one of those guys that fits in the first round. I think he's a guy that's going to get paid. And I think you keep him at shortstop as long as you can and see if he doesn't outgrow the body. That picture that we have on the screen right now, if you're watching the on the YouTube page, is pretty outdated. I mean, he's probably 205 pounds now, 6'2", 6'3", 205, 210 pounds. And he's got some of the best bat speed in the prep class this year. So Tolman is definitely a name to know. And if you're watching this show right now, when this is done, go watch the MLB Draft Show interview with Tucker Tolman, because he's one of the funniest kids I've ever met.
At number 45, Carson Wisen Hunt here. There's a lot of, I guess, mixed feelings about this, right? What are your thoughts here on Wisen Hunt and how the not playing this year and the suspension from the team, how much is that impacting his draft stock here?
I really don't know. I think Carson Wisen Hunt is a bit of an enigma right now. I think folks want to see what he looks like when he puts in some independent innings, which we're expecting him to do. I think the Cape Cod League is a possibility, though I think it's unlikely at this point. Wisen Hunt is a guy that has been, he's from the left side. He's been up to 95. He's got a great frame. He's got a great changeup. And he's got a good track record. And it's too bad that, he got suspended this season. But depending on how he looks when he comes out in independent ball, I could see Wisen Hunt jumping up into the top 20 picks. I could see Wisen Hunt, settling in somewhere in the second or third round. So he's kind of in that same Kumar Rocker bucket. So we're just going to have to wait and see. I feel pretty good about him right now at 46. I have a pretty good feeling he goes on, the beginning of day 2 or later on day 1, but we'll have to wait and see.
All right, and then we're going to round out the top 50 here. Adam Mazur, we've talked quite a bit about. Started off really strong, kind of came back down a little bit over the last few weeks. Landon Sims is another one there. Obviously, the right-handed pitcher from Mississippi State. Connor Stain, we've talked a ton about. In at number 49, the right-hander from UCF. And then rounding out the top 50, Eric Brown, the shortstop for Coastal Carolina. Let's talk a little bit more about Mazur here, Joe.
Yeah, so I still think Mazur has first-round potential without a doubt. When we bumped him up to number 21, he immediately followed that up with 3 or 4 straight starts with 4 walks. And that's kind of been the bugaboo for Mazur, is you got to stop. You got to make sure that you're not walking people. You got to be able to get to your secondaries. He's looked much better than that the last 3 or 4 starts. So he's kind of rounding back into form. We'll see where the rest of his season goes. We actually just interviewed him tonight for the MLB Draft Show, so his interview will be coming out here soon. But great kid. I think the sky is the limit. The frame has tons of room for mass and strength. And this is a kid that I think ultimately is probably going to end up throwing triple digits at some point in his life. But I mean, you're talking about a kid that's already 93 to 96 with the potential for 2+ breaking balls. It's just command with Mazur. If Mazur keeps throwing strikes, he's going to be a dynamo.
Anyone else here? What about Landon Sims?
Yeah, Landon Sims for me is a guy that we came into this season wondering whether or not he could start. And I
Right.
don't think Landon Sims did enough this season to prove that he's a starter long term. That's our opinion. I think it's definitely possible that a team like the Dodgers takes him, with the 40th pick, or a team like the Astros take him at the end of the first round. But for us personally, Sims looks like a high leverage reliever. I'm sure a team somewhere in the league feels differently, though.
All right. So that's the top 50 prospects on the updated top 400 list, which is over at prospectslive.com. If you guys have any questions on any particular prospect, we'll get into a Q&A here in a second. Or if there's anything that you guys want to talk about, be sure to hit us up in the comments section on the YouTube channel, and we'll get those questions answered for you on air. Joe, I want to get to one here. We have a question. Let's see if I can grab it here from Peter Flaherty. He says, huge fan of the show, guys. Potentially crazy question. Peter, one thing you're going to learn from myself and Joe, no question is
No,
crazy.
Peter, this is crazy. I'm just kidding. Good to hear from you, Peter.
Is there a chance Max Wagner from Clemson plays his way into a day one draft selection if he hasn't done so already? What say you, Joe?
Yeah, so Wagner is having a mammoth year with the bat, and it's following up a pretty good year last year. I think the issue with Wagner is I think he's a bit positionless. I think he could stand to be a below average second baseman or a below average third baseman, but I think at the end of the day, what you're talking about is probably an undersized first baseman with fringy tools across the board, except for with the bat. The bat is obviously pretty special. Personally, I think we have Wagner in like the 5th round because I just think that the track record gets him drafted that early. But ultimately, he reminds me a bit of Austin Knight last year from Charlotte, who was an absolute dynamo. He hit like 385 with like 18 home runs. And that's kind of what Wagner is. Just a guy that slugs with the bat, but there's just definitive questions on where you play him in the diamond as a pro. So to answer your question, I would say round 4 to 8. That would be my guess. Which I know is a giant chasm.
But I mean, if it was 2 years ago, he would potentially be not even getting drafted.
Maybe, yeah, but I mean, also, you look at the way the draft has gone. You look at 3-4 years ago, Aaron Sabato was taken with the 14th pick or the 15th pick by the Twins, and he was a definitive DH, and he's really struggled since going pro. So I mean, I think you learn lessons just as an organization and as a league and as an industry. And I think people try not to, double up on those mistakes again.
All right, I believe we've got another one here. Okay, so we went through the top 50 prospects, and Jay has a question here in the chat. When does tier 1A stop? Are the top 6 all 60 future value here? So what I'll do is I'll pull up this. I'll go back to our
go to 1 through 10
here, right? Like, so here's let's pull this question back down here. So where does I guess the question is basically, where does tier 1A stop? Where does it end? So 1 through 10, we've got Drew Jones, Kevin Parratta, Brooks Lee, Elijah Green, Jackson Holiday. That's 1 through 5. And then if we look at 6 through 10, we've got Tamar Johnson, Jace Young, Daniel Susak, Gavin Cross, and Dylan Lesko. So Joe, where would you, I guess, put the dividing line from, if you had to group them in groups of 3, 4, 5, what are the tiers here for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're going off strictly upside, I would say, and a 60 future value is a guy that is going to go to multiple all-star games. I think Drew Jones certainly fits in that bucket. And if we're playing future value, I think he's got a chance to be a 70 future value. I think Drew Jones is a guy that could go to, 6, 7, 8 all-star games and potentially fight for a few MVP awards. We'll see what happens. After that, which one of these guys could go to multiple all-star games? I personally think Kevin Parratta is like a 55 plus. I think the defense behind the plate is a real question as to whether or not he's going to be an all-star caliber pure catcher. He might have to move out from the position. I don't think Brooks Lee has enough power to ultimately be a 60 future value guy. I think Elijah Green, without a doubt, is a 60 future value guy if the swing and miss goes away. It's a guy that could go to a couple of all-star games. And then after that, I wouldn't put any 60s on anyone. I think Jackson Holiday has a chance to be a very good pro, go to a couple all-star games, but I wouldn't, go to Vegas on that. Tamar Johnson, Jace Young, Daniel Susac, Gavin Cross. I would throw 55s or 50 pluses on all of these guys. I think they're going to be very, very good big league regulars. I don't necessarily think they're multiple all-stars. Dylan Lesko, I definitely think has a chance to be a 60, but we'll see how he comes back. So you can kind of see even though they're ranked a certain way, we don't rank guys at Prospects Live based on future value. We don't just take pure upside by itself as the only limiting factor on how we grade these guys. It is risk, it is positional need, it is safety. I think there's a lot of money to be made in safety. Like Daniel Susac is going to be a very good big league regular. Doesn't mean that he's going to be a star. I think there's more value in that than Lesko, although Lesko could end up, winning 2 Cy Young awards if it all clicks. So to answer your question, I will say 2, and that is Drew Jones, and he might be better than a 60. Elijah Green, but there's work to do. And then the rest of them I would say are 55s and a bunch of 50 pluses.
All right. Great question. Appreciate it as always. I got to get this one in there because if I don't, I think Anthony Manzano is probably going to haunt me and stalk me and accuse me of not liking him for not getting his questions on air. Obviously, he's a Marlins fan and he wants to know everything that we could possibly talk about the Marlins. I'm going to pick one of these here, Joe, because he's got several that he brings up almost every week. And we love you, Anthony. I appreciate it as always. I'm just messing with you. But let's just go here in terms of our fence of prospects on either third base or first or catcher. So we got quite a bit we can go here, Joe. Who are the best fit for the Marlins? So I guess I'll tee this one up for you with what I think. If I'm just going to say, if there's any way, shape, or form, the Marlins pick at 6, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there's any way, shape, or form that Kevin Parratta is available for the Marlins at 6, I'm taking him.
Yeah.
I think that would be a great pick for them. I think they need a guy. I think they need a straight up guy that can hit. I
think you're right. I think if Kevin Parratta finds a way to fall to 6, they've got enough athletes in their system. It's a system that is rich with athletes.
Yep.
They need some guys that can thump. And I think Kevin Parratta, especially with the changes that could be coming to the catcher position in the next few years, if Kevin Parratta is on the board at 6, that should be a slam dunk. But honestly, if Daniel Susac were there and he was the 6th pick in the draft, I honestly think that's a really good pick as well. In terms of third base, listen,
you could
never draft a first baseman with the 6th pick unless you're forced to. Third base, you could always draft a shortstop and move him over. I think Jace Young makes some sense. I'm not sure if he can play third base yet. I think Tamar Johnson makes some sense. Tamar Johnson could play third base. He's already a pretty big bodied kid. But I guess the guy that I would maybe watch just from afar as maybe the type of player that the Marlins have gone after in the past, Cam Collier has a lot of upside. And while he's very, very young and he's at least 4 years away from being a big leaguer, it would not stun me to see him go in the top 6 picks.
Well, when you talk about a thumper, a guy that can mash,
Yeah.
Elijah Green could potentially be there. And, he's several years away as well, obviously, but that could be, if he can develop, that could be a big offensive bat for them as well.
And we mocked Jace Young to the Marlins. I think it makes a lot of sense. It does fill a positional need, and I think Jace Young moves very quickly. He's the type of bat that could be in the big leagues. maybe by September of 2023, but probably 2024. At the end of the day, I think the Marlins are in a position where there's so much talent at the top of this class, especially in the top 7 or 8 picks. You just kind of wait and see what falls into your lap. If Elijah Green is on the board at 6, you got to feel pretty good about that as well.
Appreciate the question, Anthony, as always. We're going to get to a couple more questions. Guys, if you have one, be sure to get it in now. We've only got a couple more minutes left here, so we'll try to get as many questions as we can. Aiden Bradford, you're up next. How many draft picks will there be from Arizona State this year? I feel like, Joe, we get one of these questions about a particular school almost every week. I forget who it was last week, but
it was, I don't remember now. I think it was Virginia Tech.
Was it? All right.
Maybe, or East Carolina, one of the two. Anyways.
Yeah, I don't know. One of those Atlantic schools. How many draft picks will there be from Arizona State? This is tough. Like the full draft. I mean,
it's tough. I mean, I can tell you 5, or I can tell you 4 that will definitely get taken. I think it's probably going to end up being closer to 5 or 6. Joe Lampe and Sean McClain up the middle. Those 2 will definitely get drafted. I think Ethan Long, the first baseman, third baseman, he's definitely going to get drafted. Probably a day 2 guy. And then there's a left-handed pitcher out there, Adam Tulloch, who is a very good bet to get drafted too. But Arizona State's got some pretty good arms in their bullpen. It wouldn't surprise me if you see a couple of guys go out of their bullpen. So Arizona State, I'll go with 5.
5 guys selected in the draft from Arizona State. Appreciate the question, Aiden Bradford. Again, guys, last chance, get some of those questions in while you still have time, and we'll get them answered on the show here. Joe, question I want to ask you. In going through this, obviously these updates come out pretty frequently now as we get closer to the actual draft. What was your biggest surprise as you were going through this particular update? Was it a player that shocked you that he had just improved his stock so much? Was it a bit of a shock where someone has kind of slipped a little bit? What were you most surprised with or most shocked by as you went through this process with the update?
I'm not going to point out any names, but I think the thing that surprises me every time we redo our evals are the guys that have slipped so hard. I mean, there are guys that we had in the top 50 of this class that have just had terrible springs. And I think, this guy here's an example. This guy's not having a terrible spring, but he's not having the spring that we expected. Robert Moore at Arkansas. I thought that was a guy that, I don't know if you remember this, but in January or February, some of the narratives were it's going to be really awkward when Dayton Moore doesn't select his son at 10 or 11. And the narrative was, he kind of fits right there. But now, he's hitting, I want to say he's hitting like 241. The power that was there last year isn't there. The defense is still been absolutely sublime. But he's no longer a guy that is kind of in that top 15, top 20 range. So, guys that we just expected to have big years that didn't, I think are always my surprise. But the guys that are blowing up and really, having breakthrough years, I think we catch on to them on a weekly basis. It's the guys that you don't hear anything about because they're not producing that surprise me the most.
Right. One guy, I mean, there's a guy that I've kind of been following a bit because I was excited to see him perform this season, and that was Brock Jones, right, at Stanford. And it's been tough. Obviously, the development there, the two-sport athlete, not as much time, not as many years in the baseball game as a lot of these other guys, but
it's been fine. I mean, with Brock Jones, like you look at his line last year and you say, how did this guy walk 23% of the time? That is unreal. But he struck out 22% of the time. Well, I mean, this year the walks, he's still up 16, 17%, but the strikeouts are at like 27%, and the power isn't there that we saw last year. So Brock Jones is a great example. That's a guy that I think we had mocked at one point before the season, before anything had transpired, in the top 10. I think we mocked him number 4 to the Pirates. And it just hasn't been the season that we expected, but that's a guy that, again, unless he sees a late season surge, it's hard to imagine him going in the first round. It's just him and Robert Moore. And I see Peter's question. Those are 2 guys that I have to question. Do they go back to school?
Right.
I
mean, so Robert Moore goes back to school. I worry about him going back to school because I just wonder if he goes back to school and what if this is who he is? What if he just had a great start to his career.
Mm-hmm.
And now this is that's the best it's ever going to be. And this is who he is. If he goes back to school and does this again.
Well, I think every kid has a number, right? I mean, every kid, every family, every advisor has a value on a player. You know, you have to put a fair value on your head. What are you willing to take as a dollar figure in the draft to go pro? And if that number isn't met and you think that you can get to that number next year, like I look at Judd Fabian, he's probably going to go just about where he went last year, about the 40th pick, 40, somewhere between 30 and 50. So, you know, we'll see if he ends up getting more money than he was offered, but I just don't think, gun to my head today, I think Robert Moore goes back to school. I understand that the defense is unbelievable, and it is, but I think he could end up being a $2.5-3 million player. And I don't know if he's going to get offered half of that. So I'd like to see what happens with him, but my hunch says that he goes the Judd Fabian route.
What if it's there in the third round? Like, what if the Royals are picking in the third round and he's still there, or the fourth round and he's still there, or the fifth round and he gets drafted?
Well, I mean, you only get so much money, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you're talking about the third round. You're talking about $750,000, $600,000, which I'm not saying is not a lot of money. It of course is. But for a guy that had top 15 stamped on his head before the season started, where you're talking, is this guy going to get $5 million? Is he going to get $4 million, $3.5 million? And then all of a sudden it's, well, you're going to settle for $600,000. Playing for your dad isn't worth a $2 million haircut.
Right.
So I think he goes back to school, but we'll have to wait and see.
All right, Zod Earl, question in the chat. Do you guys think Cooper Jerpy will have suitors in the top 10, considering the typical model-driven teams are picking later on? Astros, Guardians.
That's a great question.
Rays, Brewers.
Yeah, I think the Mets generally aren't a team that follow a strict, approach angle model. I think the Angels aren't either, but they are pretty desperate for college pitching. So I think the Angels make a lot of sense, and that's where we mocked him. I don't think that Jerpy is going to have a suitor in the top 10 just because he doesn't throw hard enough. But I do think someone in the first round is going to jump on that.
Appreciate the question, Azad. And let's I'll try to fly through some of these. Jumping off the draft interviews. Here we go. See that, Joe? We got someone checking out the draft interviews. I don't appreciate you leaving the show here to go watch the draft interviews. You could have done that after the show. But Sean Murphy, question here. How high do you think Estevan Moreno can go?
We currently have Moreno as a top 5 round guy. I think we've got him slated in the 4th round. How high do I think he could go? I think he could go in the 3rd round. But high school hitters that aren't projected to go in the 1st round are almost impossible to guess. So, I would say there is a 60% chance that Moreno goes to school, Notre Dame, or there's a 40% chance that he gets drafted. So I think he fits somewhere in day 2. I'm just not sure where.
All right. Appreciate the question. As always, Sean Murphy. Guys, that's going to wrap it up for today's show. We appreciate all the questions in the chat. If you had a question and you did not get your question answered, you can hit us up on Twitter. We'll be sure to get those questions answered. Be sure to tune in next week. We will be back to the regular time, 9 p.m. Eastern. You can follow Joe on Twitter at Joe Doyle, MILB, or myself at KRS Dunn. You guys probably already do. Otherwise, you wouldn't be watching the show, and we appreciate that. So until next time, for my partner, Joe Doyle, I am your host, Kris Dunn. We'll see you guys next Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern, with another episode of the MLB Draft Weekend Review. Take care, everybody.
Take care.